Welcome back to Crimetime Inc. And this week, since Simon is in Australia, we are going to cover some Australian true crime cases.
Well, you can't really talk about Australian true crime without mentioning Ned Kelly.
Yeah, true. He's like the poster child for Outlaws Down Under.
Right. I mean, outlaw, rebel, and a bona fide Aussie icon, all wrapped up in one very controversial package.
Yeah, and he built his own suit of armor. That's not your run-of-the-mill criminal, right?
Absolutely not. That image of Kelly in his homemade armor facing down the police is just so powerful.
Yeah, it's totally iconic. Okay, so we've got stacks of articles, historical accounts, forensic reports even, all about Ned Kelly. But I'm curious, what do you think it is about his story that still grabs people's attention even today?
That's a good question. I think it's the way his life sort of reflects Australia's past, the social tensions, the economic struggles, that spirit of rebellion that's kind of always been there.
Right, yeah. Like he embodies something about the Australian identity.
Maybe, yeah. It's a story that gets at the heart of who we are, in a way.
Okay, I like that. So let's break it down then. Ned Kelly, who was he really? And what was life like in his world?
Okay, so picture this. Rural Victoria, 1854. Edward Kelly is born, the third of 8 children in an Irish immigrant family.
8 kids. Wow.
Yeah, and his father, John Kelly, was a transported convict.
Oh, wow, right. So that already tells you something about their place in society back then.
Exactly. Even being a convict's child carried a lot of stigma.
Yeah, for sure. And they were what were called selectors, right?
Yes, small farmers trying to eke out a living, and the system was stacked against them.
It favored the wealthy landholders, the squatter.
Exactly. And that friction between selectors and squatters, it was a constant source of tension.
And I'm guessing the police weren't exactly neutral in those disputes.
You got it. The sources we have definitely paint a picture of the police siding with the wealthy and powerful.
Right. So for the Kellys, this wasn't just some abstract injustice. It was their reality.
Exactly. And to make matters worse, Ned's father died when he was only 12.
Oh, wow.
Leaving him the eldest male in a family already struggling with poverty and facing what they saw as constant harassment from the police.
That's rough. Not exactly a recipe for a happy childhood.
Definitely not. And unfortunately, Ned's troubles started early.
Oh.
Yeah, at 14, he had his first run-in with the law, arrested for assaulting a Chinese man.
Wow, 14. But I read somewhere that those charges were later dropped.
That's right. But still not a great start. And then he ends up getting involved with this bushranger named Harry Power.
Harry Power, the notorious outlaw.
The one and only. Imagine a teenager hanging out with a seasoned criminal like that.
It does make you wonder what was going through his head.
Right. It seems like he was already drawn to a life outside the law.
But then there's that story about young Ned saving a boy from drowning.
Ah, yes. That famous story. He received a green sash as a reward for his bravery.
And wasn't that the same sash he wore under his armor later on?
Yes, it was. It's a fascinating detail, isn't it?
It really is. Like, here's this kid capable of incredible bravery and compassion, yet headed down a path of violence and crime.
Exactly. It's that complexity that makes his story so compelling. It's not a simple black and white narrative.
Yeah, you're right. So what happens next? What pushes him further down that path?
Well, everything changes with what's known as the Fitzpatrick Incident. This is where the story really takes a dark turn.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me about the Fitzpatrick Incident.
All right, so it's 1878. Constable Alexander Fitzpatrick shows up at the Kelly home to arrest Ned's younger brother, Dan.
Dan? What was he accused of?
Horse stealing. Though the Kellys always insisted Dan was innocent.
Ah, so there's already some dispute about the facts.
Right from the start. Now, what actually happened next is still a matter of debate.
Okay, so what are the different versions of the story?
Well, Fitzpatrick claimed that Ned shot him in the wrist, but the Kellys, they told a completely different story.
And what did they say happened?
They said there was a struggle, but Ned wasn't even there at the time.
So who do we believe?
That's the thing. It's hard to say for sure. But regardless of what really happened, the consequences were huge.
So what happened as a result of this incident?
Ned's mother, Ellen, was arrested and sentenced to 3 years hard labor for allegedly aiding in the assault.
Wow, 3 years. Just for allegedly being involved.
That's how it went down. And for Ned, that was the breaking point. He felt like his family had been wronged, targeted unjustly by the system.
I can see how that would fuel his anger and resentment.
Absolutely. It was a turning point. He vowed revenge against Fitzpatrick, and seeing himself as the protector of his family, he decided to form the Kelly Gang.
So the Kelly Gang was born out of a desire for revenge and a need to protect his family.
In a way, yes. He joined forces with his brother Dan and two associates, Joe Byrne and Steve Hart.
And that's when things really escalate, right?
Absolutely. A few months after the Fitzpatrick incident, the gang ambushes a group of policemen at Stringybark Creek. This is where things get really serious.
Okay, so we're on the path to Ned Kelly becoming a full-blown outlaw.
You could say that. The Stringybark Creek ambush was a defining moment. It was a point of no return for Ned Kelly and his gang.
Yeah, the Stringybark Creek ambush, it really upped the stakes. I mean, it turned the Kelly gang into public enemy #1.
Yeah, it did. They went from petty criminals to the most wanted men in the country.
Right, and the government's response, they passed the Felons Apprehension Act, basically saying anyone could shoot them on sight.
Yeah, no trial, no arrest, just shoot on sight. Talk about extreme measures.
It really shows how much fear the Kelly gang was generating.
Yeah.
The authorities were desperate to stop them.
So they're on the run, facing a very real threat of being killed on sight. But they don't just disappear, do they?
No, not at all. They go into hiding, but they're not exactly lying low. They spend the next 2 years pulling off these daring raids, almost like some kind of,
Like Robin Hood and his merry men.
Yeah, exactly. They became folk heroes to some, while others were terrified of them. It's fascinating how polarizing their image was.
It really is. Okay, so we have to talk about those bank robberies. The ones in Euroa and Geraldry. Oh yeah, those were legendary. It's almost like something out of a Wild West movie, but set in the Australian bush.
And they weren't just quick in-and-out jobs either. They held entire towns hostage, took their time, even burned mortgage documents to, free people from debt.
They were very deliberate, very theatrical in their approach, which, really captured the public's imagination.
It's like they were putting on a show.
In a way, they were. Take the Geraldry robbery, for example. They didn't just rob the bank. They locked up the police and then, get this, they paraded around town in the stolen uniforms.
No way. Pretending to be reinforcements, that's brilliant.
Right. It takes guts and a certain swagger to pull that off.
Yeah, they definitely had style. And it's during that Geraldry robbery that Ned Kelly dictates that famous letter, right? The Geraldry letter.
Yes. That's a crucial piece of the puzzle. It's basically his manifesto,
He lays out all his grievances against the police, the government, the whole system he felt had wronged him and his family.
Exactly. And he does it in his own words, He threatens those who've wronged him. But he also shows this, a surprising level of political awareness.
So it wasn't just an angry rant.
Oh, not at all. The Geraldry letter is a complex document. It's long, it's rambling, it's got inconsistencies, but it's also articulate and insightful in places.
Do you have any examples of that? I'm really curious to hear how his voice comes through in the writing.
Sure. There's that part where he describes the police. He calls them, and I quote, a parcel of big, ugly, fat-necked, wombat-headed, big-bellied, magpie-legged, narrow-hipped, splaw-footed sons of Irish bailiffs or English landlords.
Wow. Okay, so not exactly holding back then.
Nope. It's raw, it's emotional, but you can see his wit, his intelligence, and that deep resentment he had towards authority.
It really gives you a sense of the man behind the myth, doesn't it?
It does. So the gang is on the run, pulling off these incredible robberies. Their legend is growing. And then, the pressure starts to mount.
Right. The police are closing in.
Exactly. And Ned Kelly, he starts planning his final dramatic stand. He's determined to strike back, but he comes up with a very audacious plan.
This is where Glen Rowan comes in, right?
You got it. In June of 1880, the Kelly gang descends on this small town, Glen Rowan. They've got this elaborate plan to derail a train carrying police reinforcements.
Derail a train.
And then attack the town of Benalla. It was a bold move.
It was. Classic Ned Kelly, really. Thinking big, taking risks.
Exactly. But this plan, it all hinged on them taking control of Glen Rowan. They needed to set their trap. So they take over the local inn, hold the townspeople hostage, and wait for the train to arrive.
Sounds like things are getting pretty intense.
They were, but there was a twist that changed everything.
What happened?
Well, one of the hostages managed to escape, a schoolteacher named Thomas Curnow.
Got away.
He did, and incredibly bravely, he risked his life to warn the approaching train.
Wow, that's amazing. So he basically foiled the Kelly gang's plan.
He did. The police were now alerted, ready for a confrontation, and when they arrived in Glen Rowan, a legendary standoff began.
So the scene is set. The Kelly gang holed up in this inn, hostages inside, and the police are closing in. What a story.
Yeah, it was a tense situation. The Kelly gang, they knew they were outnumbered, outgunned, but they weren't going down without a fight.
And this is where we get that iconic image, right? Ned Kelly in his homemade armor emerging from the smoke and gunfire.
Oh, it's an image that's become legendary. Witnesses described him as looking like a ghost. Some kind of mythical creature coming out of the mist, guns blazing.
That must have been terrifying to see.
Absolutely. He was wounded, but he just kept coming, firing at the police until finally he was brought down by a bullet to the leg.
Wow, what a scene. So what about the other members of the gang? What happened to them?
Well, tragically, they didn't survive the siege. Joe Byrne, he was killed by a stray bullet early on.
Oh, wow.
Some say he was shot while making a toast, which, adds another layer to the story.
Yeah, a touch of irony, given that he was the one who wrote down the Geraldry letter. So what about Dan Kelly and Steve Hart?
Their fate is a bit more of a mystery. The inn, it caught fire during the siege, and their bodies were found inside, in the charred remains.
So we don't know for sure if they died in the fire or if they chose to end their own lives rather than be captured.
Exactly. It's one of those enduring mysteries surrounding the Kelly gang. But Ned Kelly, he was captured alive, though severely wounded. He was taken to Melbourne, tried for murder, and sentenced to death.
By hanging, right?
Yes. His trial, it was a huge event. It captivated the whole nation, really. Public opinion was completely divided.
I can imagine people were probably arguing about him in the streets.
Thousands signed petitions to try and save him. There were rallies held in his support, but there were also plenty who saw him as a cold-blooded killer who deserved what he got.
Because even facing execution, he remained a symbol of resistance.
He did. That's what makes his legacy so complex, so fascinating. He was a criminal. There's no doubt about that. But he was also a product of his time and his circumstances.
And he challenged the system, fought back against what he saw as injustice, and that resonated with people who felt marginalized, ignored by the powerful.
Exactly. He became a symbol of that struggle, and I think that's why his story still has the power to provoke such strong emotions.
So it's not just a historical curiosity. It's a story that still speaks to us today.
It does. I think it's because he represents something bigger than himself. He embodies that struggle against authority, the fight for justice, the allure of the outlaw. It makes us question our own values.
Yeah, like, is he a hero or a villain? A symbol of rebellion or a cautionary tale? There are no easy answers.
Exactly. And even beyond his life, his story continues to surprise us. Remember, his remains were stolen from his grave.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. What was that back in the 1920s, right?
1929. And for decades, nobody knew what had happened to them. It wasn't until 2011, using DNA testing, that scientists were finally able to identify his skeleton.
Wow, so even after more than a century, new chapters were being written in the Ned Kelly saga.
That's the thing about his story, it just keeps on giving.
It really does. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today. We've explored the life and times of Ned Kelly, from his humble beginnings to his dramatic end, and even the mystery surrounding his remains.
And it's clear that he's a figure who continues to fascinate and challenge us. He forces us to confront the complexities of Australian history, the blurring of lines between hero and villain, and the enduring power of the outlaw myth.
Yeah, it's definitely a story that makes you think. Well, there you have it. A glimpse into the life and legend of Ned Kelly, one of Australia's most enduring and enigmatic figures.
A reminder that history is rarely simple, and that sometimes the most compelling stories are the ones that defy easy categorization.
Well said. Tune in tomorrow for another great true crime episode.